Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for having me here at GraphQL Madrid, or, we say Madrid, but it's probably all over the world, hopefully watching us. So thanks a lot for having me here today. And we're going to be talking about GraphQL Transformation, which is probably a term you have not heard because it's something that I it occurred to me thinking about GraphQL. And I'm going to be talking about, we'll be doing 4 different things, which we'll start with the GraphQL, we'll talk about change, and we'll see some examples, and there will be some Q&A at the end. So let's move on. A little bit about myself. I do love JavaScript. That's, a reality. I love JavaScript so much that I always introduce myself using JavaScript. I also love a bunch of other things like, React, GraphQL, testing, lean startups. And of course, don't get me wrong, it's not that the actual order that I, love things. I always have to say this because she thinks I'm always obsessed with JavaScript and technology, but it's not true. Half true. So what do? I work for Lean.js, and where I help companies to adopt cutting-edge web modern technology with confidence and incrementally. So if you want to reach out, you can connect to us using Twitter, or any, the bottom of the slides, there is also our website and Twitter. So we're going to be talking about GraphQL and change. And I think it's something very interesting because I've been involved with GraphQL for over 3 years. And I heard a lot of things about GraphQL and a lot of cool things. And I've tried to convince companies and people that they should use GraphQL. So I'm going to share with you a little bit some kind of learnings and experiences and things that work and didn't work, and why I think they didn't. So first, very quickly, I don't have to say this, but I will say, what is GraphQL? In a nutshell, GraphQL is a typed query language. I always say, if you don't like types, if you're one of those TypeScript haters, you probably don't like GraphQL because it's all about types. But today, I'm not here to talk about what GraphQL is. I want to talk about when, I want to talk about who, and also how. So then, is just GraphQL actually going to transform anything? Right? Because I always thought at the beginning, some people say, and even myself, like, oh, GraphQL is great, it's going to change so many things, it's going to make your life better, and we get super excited. But then, is it really changing things? And I think it does, and it does in 2 different dimensions. The first one is, it changes how we build applications, which is something we see often and we discuss from a technical perspective. We go from, sending overfetching and underfetching, all those things. But it also changes the way we work. And that's interesting because it's more difficult to kind of see and measure. I want to bring a couple articles to illustrate this. This article you might have seen, it's an article where Peggy, who currently works at Apollo, was showing some improvements, and she actually could measure that they reduced 4,950 lines of code, and it was like great. It's a lot of code you get rid of, and imagine all the advantages you get from doing so. There is also this other article from Airbnb, Adam Neri from Airbnb, and he says, he claimed at the time that Airbnb moves 10 times faster with GraphQL. And when I saw this the first time, I thought like, wow, 10 times is a lot. Do they really mean 10 times? And I don't think they, like, how do they know that? Is like in the previous example, it was very clear. You could measure the lines of code and you say, no, I reduced my amount of code by this. But how do you know you're going 10 times faster? Are you measuring that over a period of time? How many projects? Is GraphQL the only variable that you change in that? It's like, how do you really measure that? So I think what they really mean is they move at a different order of magnitude. Like, it really makes a difference. And then I thought, if it really makes a difference and we can see it, that we should all be using GraphQL. But I don't see that's happening, actually, at least at the speed I thought when I saw these articles. Because to sum up about those 2 articles, GraphQL can help us in 2 different ways. One is it can improve products. It can make our products better because it reduces our code. We can focus on one thing. We have more declarative data requirements, etc. But it also changes the way we work. And that's interesting, because if that was true, that we can move 10 times faster, why is not everyone using GraphQL? I wondered that for a while, and I've been thinking about it. And so I think the reason is we tend to focus on code and those things that we can measure, which are quite easy to measure. You could say, in this application, before we were sending 5 requests, and now we send 1. In this application, it took us like 1 second to download this data, and now we do it in half second. We had 1,000 lines of code, and now we have 100. Whatever, you can easily measure those things. But how do you measure developer experience? How can you say, from a very accurate scientific approach, like, yes, this is the kind of developer experience my team is having. Like, how is it going with GraphQL? Really good. My developer experience in my scale, it's now 7.6 compared to the previous one. And that's really good. Must be really, it's like, how do you measure that? It's really difficult. So that article is from 2007, and this article is from 2018. And it's been a long time. And I was thinking recently, how are things now with GraphQL? So when is this going to happen? Like, when are we, all of us, going to be using GraphQL? So I look at Google Trends, and I saw this, which I was a bit sad when I realized, because it seems we reached plateau. And I don't know about you, but not all my colleagues and friends are using GraphQL. So what's going on here? I don't know if it really affected this, but I thought could be. At that time, COVID came, and it changed, it shaked a lot of things, and it's interesting, because I honestly don't know how it affected COVID, that growth, and there's some correlation. I don't know if there is some relationship between GraphQL and COVID, but I do believe that there is a good time now to actually embrace GraphQL, because this time everything is changing. You might be working from home. I'm delivering this all from home and not from Madrid, unfortunately. And a lot of things are changing. Some companies, they are not selling. They need to reduce cost, and they are, a bit sad, but they are laying off people. On the other hand, what I see when I speak with companies is that maybe the CTO is gone, and so the CIO is taking the role of the CTO, and that also brings the tech lead is going up in the hierarchy of the company. So things are changing, and that's an opportunity to change, because before, in the past, some companies or people would say, I'm not so sure about GraphQL, how much should I invest on this? But now things are changing. And maybe the person who actually was saying no to GraphQL, now is gone, is working is being fired or whatever, it's gone. So there is change. And on the other hand, companies either are kind of struggling because their business models, or they are selling less, and so they need to look for new products and new opportunities. So they need to build more things, they need to improve, they need to go faster, they need to increase velocity, and GraphQL can help that. Or some other companies, they're actually doing very well. They're selling a lot because they are doing, I don't know, like it's a supermarket online or whatever, and then you need to improve, optimize your system, and you don't have a lot of time. So that's a good combination, right? So this can be a good time to introduce change, I believe. So change is happening right now, so we can leverage that and bring GraphQL to our organizations. So now is the time to change to GraphQL. Yes, now is the time. So what do we want? We want GraphQL. Yes, who's going to take the lead? I don't know. Like, who's going to do that in the company, right? We get excited, but okay, how do we do it? Who should take the lead? I think that's a very important question you should answer. And I think there is an important aspect in GraphQL, that is, control is given from server to client. And that implies that people who were responsible for certain things on the back end now, or the infrastructure, they see how those things go to the front end. And what I've experienced is that they don't like it. I mean, who doesn't like that? If you're a front end, you love it, you're getting things. But if you're losing those things, it's different. And if you especially, you're bringing this new technology, this GraphQL, you're an infrastructure person, and they are going to use that thing, but you're still responsible for the APIs, right? So if the API is down on a Saturday night, who are they going to call? It's not going to be the front end. So I see a lot of resistance. I see a lot of front end that they get super excited, or product teams, depending on jargon, how you call them, but kind of product engineers teams, they get very excited. The infrastructure teams, it depends on the company, which makes sense, because if you've been working with REST for 10 years and you know how it works, you know how scalability works, how security works, you understand all those things. And now we want to bring another technology that I think most of it, the benefits go for the front end, because at the product teams, you can add more features quicker without asking the backend team, which is great, gives flexibility. But what does the backend and the infrastructure team get there? So it's normal you can see some resistance, and some say, I'm not sure I want to change. So in my experience, if you want to be successful bringing GraphQL to your little project, startup, big organization, it doesn't matter, you need to think of everyone involved in the process, because otherwise you will find resistance from people, and you don't want to do that. You want to be successful, right? So how are you going to do it? Okay, so I'm going to bring 2 examples. And before I do that, I'm going to drink a little bit of water. And then I thought, okay, we're going to bring GraphQL to some projects. I don't know, like, what is your situation, if you're a small company or big. But I thought, can we think in some sort of terms that we all understand? And I start putting things there and kind of illustrate them, and so we can discuss. It's easier to discuss when we have some common picture that we all understand. So I thought of organizing projects and developers, front end, back end, that's kind of category we hear a lot. You can also think, if you like, product teams or whatever, but kind of those two sets. And then type of project. So you're building a project, and you could say website. Website can fall into both categories. Can be front end and back end working on that. You can also have a web app, same situation. Front end, back end can work on that. A CMS, probably nowadays, I think I would put CMS on the only front end side of it. You might use a CMS, and I don't think you would use something like you build your own CMS or things like that. You just connect to an API. So I would put it there. Obviously, it depends on the project. It's just to organize some thoughts on this slide. APIs, I put it on the side on the right, and fine. And I thought, GraphQL, I don't know if you noticed, but there's an intersection there between those 2 worlds. And we normally don't look at that, and we don't talk about it. And I mean, we didn't have to. Why? We always thought in terms of this is either front, back, or full stack. But there's an intersection there. And now we have GraphQL, which lies in between both. And that gives us a lot of flexibility and new things we can do. So I see GraphQL as something very powerful that is in between the 2. And I think it's important to point this out, because for a reason I will tell you in a bit. But before I do that, I was also thinking in what are other things that we also use a lot, and it's very common understanding for everyone: programming languages. So you can think of how you organize your programming language, how your company or your projects organize programming languages. So what programming languages do they use? So front end dominated by JavaScript, and back end has different languages. So if you use GraphQL is just a specification. It's very abstract. You cannot use the specification, right? You need to use an implementation. Which one are you going to choose? You could use a JavaScript implementation. You could use .NET, etc. And I think there is some reflection you need to have here is, if you choose .NET for your GraphQL implementation, you're probably saying to the team that takes care of responsible for the front end that they are not gonna do much on it, right? Because it's the different language. I'm a front end developer. I use JavaScript. GraphQL implementation is .NET, so that's responsibility for those .NET guys. But that's something important to bear in mind when you want to bring it to an organization, is what language you're going to choose. You can choose more than one language, but that's kind of, I would put some thought on that. What language is going to implement the GraphQL API or languages? Because the big question is, who's going to own that intersection, right? Who's going to maintain that code? Who's going to be responsible for that? And there are different options here. It can be front end and back. It can be either of the 2. And that's a discussion that, in my experience, you need to have with the team who is going to adopt GraphQL. But it should be clear who's going to own that. And again, sometimes I hear that it's kind of like, okay, this is a backend thing, but not necessarily. It's the intersection, so it touches both sides. So I think also front end have a lot to say nowadays, especially that many front ends are asked to be full stack, and so I don't see any problem by front end people also having responsibility on owning, even designing the schema of the GraphQL. Although I think it's better that the more you do between the two, the better. Like you have those two, that intersection together, or at least part of it. I'll show you some example now. And before I show the example, let's do a little recap to see where we are with these ideas I was throwing. It's time for change. So that's good. You know, we can bring change because everything is changing. So let's take advantage of that. With GraphQL, we can build better products, but also we can build things faster, right? And that's really important. We should not underestimate how we build things with GraphQL. GraphQL is in a specification, so you can't. It's not like in React, you use React, the library is JavaScript, that's it. In GraphQL, you are gonna choose a language or languages, because you can also do that. And that's a reflection. You need to put some thought on that. What the language or languages that you're gonna use. It's really important to identify who will own the GraphQL implementation. Because to get started with, if you identify who is going to do it, that's going to actually help you bring GraphQL to if you choose the right people, like influencers in the organization, people who want to push the idea, is going to be easier, especially in the long term. If you choose languages that there is a lot of adoption. Let us say in your organization, most of it is .NET, and there is very little of JavaScript. So, or Node. If you decide to do it in Node, guess what? It's going to be quite difficult that the .NET teams get excited and help you with the adoption, which it's important if you want to be successful. And last but not least, front-end developers or the product teams, they're actually the ones who benefit the most by having GraphQL. So yeah, it's probably important to give them some voice and power in this negotiation, because sometimes even it's an API, but the front-end team can also design the schema, can also maintain the schema. So there are a lot of things they can also do. So don't forget and bring everyone on the table when you are discussing GraphQL on your teams or company. And last but not least, there can be some friction on the backend. Not necessarily. I mean, I've seen backend developers who are very excited with GraphQL, but it's kind of makes sense, because they are not going. The only thing they get is, okay, now I need to learn this new thing to improve that other person's life, which, I mean, is very nice. We should do those things, but sometimes we don't do that. It's like, okay, I need to learn this thing. I'm busy, and it's going to change my environment, and like, why do I have to do this? So you need to make sure you explain things properly. And I'm going to show you two examples where I try to explain or bring GraphQL to different organizations. So two projects where I was involved somehow. I decided to bring two because we don't have a lot of time. And also, I don't know, one is a small, medium enterprise, and the other one is a large enterprise. So I don't know, actually, it's going to be your case. You might be working for a startup, but you can apply, some lessons anyways. So the first case, it was a client who came to us and said it was a small, medium enterprise. They had one real estate website, kind of big in Spain, and they adopted React, and they found some problems. The website was slower, user engagement went down, probably because the performance was not as good. Well, some problems that they wanted to improve this. So we had a look, and then we look at the stack, and the first thing we saw was that there were a lot of libraries there, and there's nothing wrong with that. They do a good job, each of those tools in their own space. But for the product team, it was not easy to make changes, right? That was one problem, and you need to be very good at all those tools, and sometimes you need to change the tools. So the more tools you have, the more overhead you have. And so at some point they were like building those crazy sagas, and I was thinking like, well, you're supposed to deliver a product, not to build this state management thing, right? So what is the solution? We thought we need to simplify, and then we'll be able to move faster. So let's bring GraphQL, all the things. So we did it. I'm going to tell you also what was the structure of the company. It was a small, medium enterprise, but it was part of a bigger company. It's like, this kind of a startup or that is acquired by another company that is a group of companies, and things get more complicated. So the team that owns that product is a small team, cross-functional team. They also do a little bit of backend, but there is a big company that has a backend infrastructure team that provides the infrastructure, the APIs, or some of it, and so the front end or the product team had to discuss and negotiate certain features and changes on the API with this backend team that was in a different city. And actually, the team that was supporting what I'm calling a small medium enterprise 5 was the backend team that was supporting the company number 5 was also supporting other websites of other companies. So the backend team is very busy. And so how do you introduce change quickly? How do you make changes on the interface quickly when you depend on that API? And making changes on the API might affect the performance. So you need to be aware of what is the structure of those teams. And we thought GraphQL was great because it would bring it will make the front end or the product team independent from the other company. Once you have your GraphQL API, the product team can have an endpoint that you can hit. You can optimize your requests, so performance will be good, and you can make changes on the UX, on the user interface. You can try different things very quickly and move fast without having to call the backend team. So the idea was good. Now, because this was not the first product we did, I kind of learned lessons from previous projects. And so what we did is the front-end team, the product team was super happy about the idea, let's bring GraphQL. But what we did is we went to this other city and we went to the office and we spoke with the infrastructure team. That was the first thing we did. And so because we wanted to hear what challenges they had. And we wanted to minimize how much work the infrastructure team had to do. And we wanted, actually, our goal was basically, we spent 3 hours on that meeting. And I remember when we arrived to the meeting, there were those 3 backend people looking at us like this. It's like, okay, what do you want? And our goal was to convince them not only that this technology was better for us, but they didn't have to do anything. And it was not going to change anything in their life or the way they work. So the challenges, or what I would say, the checklist that they were coming and saying, okay, what about this? So they have some continuous integration system, some infrastructure. And in the short term, we didn't want to change this. So our strategy was to, maybe not the best approach, I would say, but they had some REST API, and we embedded the GraphQL API, the first version of the prototype, using that Express API that they were using for something less relevant. But for us, that was important because they could use the same pipeline. They didn't have to change anything to deploy. So if we wanted, we could deploy our GraphQL proof of concept to staging without them changing anything in the pipeline. That was really good. They were very happy about it. The second pain point they had was the CDN. They are used to that project. I think they were using Akamai. But they knew how it worked. They were happy with it. So you can't just go there and say, oh, well, we're gonna do this via post and things like that, because that was a deal breaker. So we use persistent queries, and we explain them how they work, how we're gonna use the CDN, and basically they don't have to change anything, and they were very happy with it. The third point was, they were using some server-side rendering, and to do that, they were getting the data from a Java API, and they didn't want to change this. It was not like super optimal, but it was kind of working for them. So for me, I was like, well, this is not the way it works. We should use our GraphQL this different way, and we'll get the state in this way. But in the end, we ended up using getting that big data and from that API, because they would identify, okay, what request is this one? So this is the data for the entire page. And so they would send you a big giant JSON, all this on the server side. And so we would use that JSON to initialize the state of the GraphQL client, and then we would get the data on the client. It was a bit of hacky. I can't remember the name. It was like a schema. It was Apollo had some schema thing for initializing the state. But anyway, it worked well. The point is, even I thought it was not the best way to use that Java API for this GraphQL integration. It enabled us to do it. Performance was the same as they had, but they didn't have to change anything, because we wanted to bring value to the organization quickly and demonstrate this works, and you don't have to change the way you currently work. I'm talking about the infrastructure team. And the interesting thing about this project, and that's why I like to talk about this, is that we actually ended up not bringing GraphQL to the organization, and the kind of blocker came from the front end. And it's a good exercise, right? So once we convince everyone on the infrastructure, we build a prototype, we deploy to staging, and then we could extrapolate, okay, it took us this amount of time to build this, to migrate your Redux sagas into GraphQL. This is the effort it takes us to deploy. We understand how it works, everyone is happy. But then you can project and say, well, this is gonna take us, take over all these sagas and replace it with GraphQL. It's great, but it's going to take us this amount of months. Can we afford this? And the answer of the stakeholders was no, we don't have time for this. And so they decided not to do it. And I think that's an important lesson, because like I learned the hard way in the past, like, trying to bring a technology to a project, and just because it's so cool, you try, and in the end, you're not meeting the deadlines, you're all super stressed, you're working overtime just because you wanted to bring that technology, which was super cool, but it didn't meet the deadlines of the company. So you need to be aware of that. And sometimes we are not ready for that change, and it's fine. Maybe another time. But I think that's better than bringing a technology when you are not ready. So it's good to make this exercise. First, convince, explain how things work, make sure everyone is on the same page, build some proof of concept, and then get that evidence and say, okay, I think it's not good to do it. And the interesting thing as well, after we got everyone excited, even the infrastructure team and the CTO, and when we went back and said, look, I think we should not use GraphQL, and these are the reasons. It's great, but it's going to take this amount of time, and I'm not sure, do you want to do that? And they said no. And they're actually very happy, because in the end, the CTO didn't care about GraphQL. They wanted more performance, and they wanted better engagement. They didn't buy GraphQL. So that was a good lesson. And they were happy in the end. So the other use case, it's a project. It's something that I'm actually involved right now. So I don't have what's the end of the story? I don't know. But I can tell you, I think it's a nice exercise. This is a very large organization. And in the end, it's not so different compared to the other one, because in the end, the other one was a small company in a bigger one, some sort of. But you can think of, you have a big organization, and I just realized I'm a bit short on time, so I'm going to be a bit quick now. So typically, big companies, they organize themselves. They can have domains, and so each domain might have a core team, and each core team, its domain has kind of what I would call the peripheral teams, right? You can have supplies, or customer service, or users. So they take care of different parts of different products. And the core team might, be responsible for infrastructure, some Kafkas, or things that the other teams use to deliver their products. So interesting thing is that the core teams, in my experience, they tend to be a lot of backend engineers, and they have a lot of experience, right? In REST APIs, and they've been doing this for many, many years. So what happens is that because they are very senior and they're very experienced in REST, and they're responsible for many things, they tend to be a bit resistant to adopt GraphQL. So they're a bit like, I'm not sure, I'm a bit hesitant about this. So if you want to bring GraphQL to a big organization, or if you're a part of a big organization and you want to be GraphQL, I'm not sure that's a good starting point. I mean, as I said before, you need to try to have everyone on board, and you should talk with them. But in the end, there is risk. And in doing that, because if it doesn't work, it's going to affect a lot of things. So you probably don't want to start by that. On the other hand, you can think of these peripheral teams. Some of them are less experienced, right? Might be more junior because they don't have to be as experienced as the core team in general. You can identify also what are the teams that they might be already interested in GraphQL, right? They might be talking about it, they might be excited. And you can also find projects that have less risk. And so they also will have less impact in the organization, but you can start with something small and then grow from there. And the other interesting thing is, because you can think, if I go back, you can choose one team that is delivering one product. And so that team can improve the communication between front and back and all that stuff. And that's really good. There is value in that. But at the same time, that team might communicate with other teams, so that you can also improve if you are able to. One team that is adopting GraphQL and is working well can influence another team that can also, because team A and team B, like customers and users, those teams talk to each other. By one having GraphQL will influence the other one to bring GraphQL as well. So I would like to finish with this. I think it's we get very excited about technology. I do love GraphQL. I hope that is going to transform all our applications and the way we build apps. But it's really important that we are aware of everyone that is involved in this change. So sometimes we get very excited, but some people might have families that are more busy, or they work on projects that have more deadlines, or they've been working in technology that is more legacy. And like, there are different stories. And if you want to be successful bringing GraphQL to your company or to convince your colleagues, you need to be really aware of what is the interest in bringing this to the whole group, and they make sure that they understand what are the risks involved in this situation. And then I wish you good luck in your transformation. Thank you very much. That was my little story for today.